Hi, this is October 26th, 2021. Get the year correctly. And um, we are today listening to um, Mike Ross. And Mike did a presentation at the recent pause, and a couple people told me that they thought it was really great and very practical and very useful. So I asked Mike to come join us. Mike has been a FileMaker developer forever, and now he works with Beeswax. I think you said part-time?
Part-time.
Yeah, that you work for them, and then of course you have your own clients as well. So he did a presentation on when not to use abstraction. And, abstraction is one of those abstract concepts that some people can't wrap their brains around. So what we thought we would do is have Mike talk about what abstraction is and when to use it and when not to use it. And feel free to ask plenty of questions. Do you want the questions held to the end, Mike, or do you like them?
Not at all.
Okay.
So in the spirit of pause, my session was a discussion.
Okay.
I do have maybe 15, 20 minutes worth of notes. And since we met in a wilderness retreat, we had no idea what technology would be there. So there's no slides or anything else. So please just interrupt me whenever you want. So it's a discussion.
Okay.
My dreaded thing at pause was I had these 20 minutes of notes, and I figured when I finished, there'd still be 40 minutes left, and there'd be nothing but crickets, but that wasn't the case. So
great.
So I do encourage you.
So Mike is going to lead a discussion on abstraction today. And take it away, Mike.
Thank you. Well, I've already been introduced. Some of the salient points of that introduction is I've been programming for over 30 years. And during that period of time, there's, as a part-time developer at Beeswax and as a full-time developer myself, I've had the opportunity to inherit a lot of databases, good, the bad, and the ugly. And I've also had an opportunity since FileMaker 3 and 4 days to write a lot of code myself and realize with hindsight that it also can be pretty ugly as well. And that we endeavor to learn new tricks, implement them, and then down the road, 10 years later, we kind of learned to sort of regret that. And as I've gotten on in years and realized I won't be programming forever, the flip side of inheriting somebody's code and working on it is that I have code as well that somebody else is going to inherit. And so it's really important that when we design, that we design with legibility in mind. And that can go down to simply well documenting your scripts. Make sure that those scripts are well defined. They show specifically what they are intended to do. And if you're doing something that's really tricky in those scripts, that you comment on why you are doing this. I don't know how many people have ever inherited somebody else's code base out there. If you do, kind of raise your hands. Yeah, okay. So it could be a mixed blessing. And some of the challenges that I've run across, ran across one in the FileMaker 5 and 6 days where a very well-noted programmer who will go nameless here created the equivalent of what was a card window back then, which required some tricks, but he used this card window for maybe 40 things throughout the database. And when there was a bug and you tried to troubleshoot it, you would spend hours trying to nitpick this little bug, trying to find it, because just getting to that little window required hundreds of lines of script of obscure code. Painful, very painful. I don't know if, Jonathan, you've ever encountered that yourself?
I remember doing faux card windows in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not just so much the card window itself, but it's the fact that the card window was a multi-purpose tool to do dozens of different things, as opposed to doing one thing really well. And, you know, and I talked to this programmer who, after he left that particular job and a couple of years down the road, and in hindsight, he says, yeah, I overly abstracted that thing. And that was a mistake. And that's sort of the cautionary tale. I recently inherited a project which also has to go nameless. And it told me that this project, as I was working on it, they were trying to finish it up. They were trying to collect the debt, and they were 600% over budget. And when I looked at the code, I realized when you clicked on one button to go to a different layout, there was 400 lines of code to do that, just because they wanted to abstract it. That the original developer in that particular system had this toolkit that he built that he thought he could throw in everywhere. I got to tell you, when it doesn't work. One of the things, and one of the reasons that people come to you to use FileMaker is that they need for you to create very unique things. Otherwise they could buy some off-the-shelf software, live within its few parameters, and be done. But we're creating unique things for clients. And that's sort of antithetical to, in some degree, abstraction. Because when you have different projects with different unique things, if you try to take a toolkit that you built from one space to another space, you can run into some problems, and we'll discuss that. So let's talk about what abstraction is. It is the process of taking away or removing characteristics from something in order to reduce it to a set of essential characteristics. And we do this all the time. We work with abstraction on a very simple level in FileMaker. Every time we use a FileMaker function, that's a level of abstraction. Every time we create a custom function, it's a level of abstraction. Every time we create a script and we have the tools use script parameters, we are abstracting our script in such a way that it could be multi-purpose. And all that is a great thing. All that's a good thing. You get this discrete little chunks of abstraction that perform their little tasks. And that's a wonderful thing. I don't think that you can say that that's a bad thing at all. And likewise, many times when we're doing scripts, we have to handle a number of different conditions to whatever we are scripting. And you have this choice of how much do we want to abstract this script to hold all those conditions, or maybe use more of a brute force alternative of spelling everything out. And many times I like to use kind of a brute force method so that I know that the person who's going to look at the script down the road has a better feeling for what we're doing here. So backing up a little bit, there are some key concepts in abstracting code that some of you probably have heard, some of you may not. One is called dry. Dry means don't repeat yourself. So there are a couple of key concepts in abstracting code. One of them is dry. Don't repeat yourself. I'm sorry. That was
very meta.
Please.
Good job, Mike.
Code duplications are really ugly and they're hard to maintain. Imagine fixing the same bug in 4 or 5 different places. So if you've written some code and you've kind of had that same code in 4 or 5 places and you haven't abstracted it, then that means if there's an issue with that code, then you've got to seek all those points and fix them over and over again. And so good abstraction recognizes if you have a couple of components that have the same logic duplicated, then go ahead and extract that logic. And that makes a lot of sense. By the way, please interrupt me if you have any questions. The other concept is wet, the opposite of dry. And that has several acronyms to it. Write everything twice, we enjoy typing, or waste everyone's time. And so it's a balance here. It's a balance between the dry and the wet. And I have, over the course of the years, seen a lot of FileMaker presentations where clever coders have taken great glee in abstracting your code. And, you know, I can point to some of the prominent folks out there like Matt Petrowski, who every time, if you've ever seen his ISO podcasts,
FileMaker
every time
magazine.
every time he wants to demonstrate something, he has to spend a half hour going through all those abstractions before he gets to a central point. Happens every episode. That's enough to drive you crazy.
He creates really elaborate stuff.
He creates and it's very good, and it works for him. How well it works for others who may follow beyond him remains to be seen. I happen to think that sometimes that gets in the way of his presentation. So that's just a thought on that. So there's a concept called the wrong abstraction. So duplication can be far cheaper than a wrong abstraction. The wrong abstraction will become far more complex and harder to read or maintain than code duplication over time. Now, everybody's intentions when they develop code is really good. We're all just trying to write great code. And at some point you see that you have an unnecessary duplication, and you see that some components in your code share the same functionality. So you go ahead and you do the right thing. You extract the functionality and have them all nice and lean and clean. And that works really well. And then, 4 or 5 years down the line, the business logic changes. And new requirements show up, they always do. So now you have a component that has a teeny tiny change in its behavior, but it kind of still follows the standard of what you intended your code to do. And so with 1 or 2, small modifications that will be added to the abstraction, everything is still cool. So now you've got a little bit of code, a little bit of exception, nothing, anything that you can't handle. And then, a few more years go by and the business logic changes again. And then you've got a new programmer in there taking a look at the code, and he says, oh, how can I take this code that's abstracted and make it work for this new business requirement? So he goes into the code and he starts making more modifications to the abstractions, putting exceptions into the code. And it starts becoming a little obtuse. And this continues on and on. Yes,
Yet
John?
another else if.
Another else if, yeah. So what we're doing here is really muddying the whole purpose of the abstraction process. You want it simple. That's kind of the goal in abstraction is to reduce duplication and I think create simplicity in your code. So bear in mind that no abstraction is actually better than a wrong abstraction.
Mike, may I say, oftentimes what I find is that it happens not 5 years later, it's immediate. Once the user starts using the system, and I've got this beautiful script that handles everything that they could possibly want, they find something that I didn't account for. As they start to use it, they say, oh, but in this situation, we have to do it this way. There it goes.
And this is one of the core tenets of abstracting data. If you abstract too early in the process, not understanding all the business logic and all the workflow, you will do yourself more harm than good. So you're better not abstracting at first, and then once you understand as you go through the development process, if you use an iterative process to develop like I do, you can come to a point where you say, oh, now I have a strong enough feel, I can abstract this chunk here and I can abstract this chunk there. I think that's necessary. I think people who abstract early on in the game, thinking they have a total understanding of what the business model is going to be for a particular project, might find themselves doomed to a lot of headache.
Well, and the client can tell you, oh, but we only do it this way. And they lie.
Right.
Because once they start using it, they'll go, oh, well, we forgot to tell you about this, every time.
And
my favorite phrases from a client is almost never. Oh, we almost never do that.
Yeah.
It's like, if it's not never, if it's almost never, then it's not never.
Right.
In some ways, it sort of Plato's what was it called, the rules of the cave, where basically what you see the shadows of what a customer wants, but it may not be actually what the customer wants. Making that what they tell you and what you hear and what you intend to do can all be three different things. And that's one of the reasons why how I develop is sort of try to mold a database into shape. We can go with project specs and prototyping, but there's still, does this, every step, does this look right to you? What works, what doesn't? And that's all part of the process. If you throw abstraction into there, you can make your code very challenging to make that database work. So any other comments so far?
Well, I like your point that you abstract later.
Mm-hmm.
I've never thought of that.
Right.
As I'm building it, I go, oh, okay, well, here's my print script. Let's just, let's have let's use that everywhere.
Well, yeah, and that's a good abstraction. I mean, it's not uncommon if you've got a project that works with a lot of documents that you have a bunch of different print setup and print scripts, that you can use, that you don't have to, the orientation could be, portrait or landscape, every record, just single record or records being browsed, and all those conditions you could put in there. I think those are great abstractions. Nothing wrong with that.
I threw that out as an example, but there's but there's always, but you make the case for analyze where you would use those later rather than earlier, and that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think as programmers we like to think we're really clever and really good, and some of the best programmers I think are really guilty of this. And so when I was giving this talk at Pause, I thought I was going to be thrown out of the conference with this idea that abstraction is not a good thing in every case, or there is a time and a place for it. But that wasn't the case. So
when I think of abstraction in FileMaker, a couple examples. The one that comes up, I think, the most is the go to layout. Oh no, hold on, that's bad timing. Carry on. I gotta get.
Okay.
So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Mike. It has been the bane of my existence for a long, long time, interacting with extremely high-level programmers that view abstraction as the end goal as opposed to a method of trying to save themselves some steps in some situations. So.
It has a high cost, and
it's almost like normalizing your scripts. I mean, we're so into normalizing our data and making sure that we have just the right tables and just the right data points in just the right tables, and so we try to do that with our scripts too, to make it super efficient and super lean, and that can, as you're making a good case for, that could come back and bite you in the butt.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious, you build a system for some company and you've got an invoice and an invoice line item table, and you may have purchase orders and a PO line item table. And you think, well, I can just kind of repurpose a bunch of things on those line items, that might be handy, but they end up being very different case scenarios, may work, but may not work. And then, of course, if the business rules change, that's going to cost you a lot of time to fix those things. So,
have you seen, Mike, any abstractions that go to the point where the field names are abstracted into a table themselves? Or
I wouldn't say that, but we do have the tools to set field by name in FileMaker, which I think is, can be acceptable in some cases.
May I give my example of that?
Absolutely, please do.
I have a client who's a doctor who wrote her own system, and she called me in because she needed to add some things on there that she didn't know how to do. It was totally outside her core work. But I was looking in there, and she was not into normalization of even her tables, and so she would have a situation. Well, actually, in her main table, she had probably a dozen or dozen and a half sets of 10 fields, whose it was this item 1, this item 2, this item 3. So they would be these sets of 10 fields, and then she would have 10 scripts,
for
10
each one.
separate scripts for each one for the first one for the second one. And I said, well, you know what, if you use set field by name at the beginning of the script and just pass it the number, build the name, and do the set field by name, it would mean you'd have one script instead of 10. And she goes, oh, that's too hard to think about. We're not going to do that.
It is. I mean,
this is a doctor of pathology, super brilliant person, and has been through all kinds of education. And that was too difficult of a concept for her. But it would have, had she, of course, had she used more tables and less, and less multiple fields, that would have been a big help too. And then her scripting would have been a lot easier. But I just saw that and I thought, what a perfect example of where abstraction would be perfect.
Right. And the thing is that excessive abstraction is the opposite and polar end to citizen developer.
Apologies for the random phone call. Okay. When I think of abstraction, the word indirection comes up as well. When Mike said a moment ago, set field, I thought, hey, that's one of them indirection things. And the example that I use to kind of wrap my head, or the example I see the most, is the go to layout, where you've got go to layout by number, which I don't use much, but go to layout by reference. And that to me is the non-indirection and arguably the non-abstracted method. And so like I was working yesterday on a system that's, that file's got 20 things, and I added a table, got 2 scripts. I've got go to detail, go to list, because pretty much for every table, I've got a detail and a list. That's kind of standard. And so I've got this script that I initially had built out where all of the go to layouts were by reference. And it was, the script was very simple, brute force, but long, where it was like, if param equals this, if param equals that. So it can't really break if I rename the layout. And I was about to flip it to abstraction, which was basically, if my naming convention was consistent for layouts, I could construct the name of the layout, magically, and I could have like a 10-line script. Then I looked and it's like, oh, some of my layouts are named with this pattern, base table, double underscore, something, detail, and some with base table, space, greater than, they weren't consistent. So I was, oh, darn, I got to just keep it the way it is for now. So that's my take, is that abstraction and indirection, although I think there's different kinds of abstraction, but it's adjacent to the topic of indirection, which I'm tending to use more and more when I can control the naming conventions.
Yeah, and bear in mind that you understand that principle if you had decided to abstract that, but the programmer who may come after you may not. And so he may start creating layouts, and then he sees that you've got the script and it doesn't fit the mold that you created.
Or he renames one of my layouts, so to speak. So it's got to be used really carefully and probably documented as like, we're using this abstraction because it's useful. Just, be forewarned.
Right. It's good to put that stuff in your script code. I have a comment from a C programmer named Brian Eds. He says, because this relates to what you said, the primary cost of abstraction is indirection. In my experience, you should only abstract when the added abstraction clarifies things more then the added indirection confuses them. You got to wrap your head around that a little bit.
And sometimes the speed of coding with indirection,
Mhm.
whether you're using indirection for layout or in a set field, I'd throw that in for extra credit. It's like sometimes it's a faster deploy. And then if I was handing, maybe someone else wants to rewrite it with a lot of if branches to get from strings to references.
Mhm.
But certainly I'd go for code clarity, code readability first and foremost.
And I think it's easier to write abstraction than it is to debug it. It's been my experience, especially if you're not clear and stating what your objectives or goals. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen the case where, in the case of this one client that this project I inherited that was over budget, script triggers in every layout, script triggers on fields, script triggers all over the place. So just getting from one point to another would initiate all these triggers that just got so much in the way of being able to switch a layout.
Well, they get in the way of each other a lot of times.
Oh
too.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And some of them can be really hard to debug because they don't work properly when the script debugger is running. So,
Right.
especially on timer scripts. So, so to the point here, and to my earlier point about coding early on in the game, that's called premature abstraction, and it's a problem that us guys will have later in life sometimes. But I'm sorry. But the thing is, as my point is that all abstraction must be based on practical experience, and that is don't abstract too early. I mean, that's it's a problem of trying to map something digitally from the real world and doing it accurately. So, some other notes. The other thing that happens is we feel that we look at somebody else's script, and sometimes even our own script, that we think that that script is sacred. That, oh, we created this beautiful thing long ago. We dare not touch it. We dare not get rid of it. Let's go in there and put in all those conditionals and everything else and try to maintain that. And so that code exerts a very powerful influence. When we have a code in a script, we just have this logical thing in the back of our brain that says, hey, this code is necessary and correct. And we know that the code required effort that we've expended, so let's not throw it away. That's kind of what we think about. But the sad truth is, the more complicated and incomprehensible the code, the deeper the investment in creating it and to preserve it, and the more we feel the pressure to retain it. This is called the sunk cost fallacy, that sometimes you've got to start over from scratch. And our brain sort of looks at it and says, boy, this is so confusing. Must have taken ages to get it right. And I think we've all kind of written scripts that are sort of like, I wish I had time to sort of rewrite this thing because it's gotten a little bit crazy. The cost of working on abstracted code when it becomes full of condition-laden procedures and interleaves a number of vaguely associated ideas is exponentially more costly than not duplicating in the first place. Yeah, maybe sometimes a rethink is valid. Maybe breaking that code up and to less abstracted and different scripts might, for FileMaker users, might be the ideal choice. But we can't be so wedded to our code that we refuse to give it up. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. Or maybe you all are such great coders that you never make mistakes. So the more valuable an abstraction is, the more damage it can cause.
When
These
you
are
say
paradoxes.
valuable, what's your definition of valuable in that context?
The more that you value its sustainability, and the more important it is to the system at large that you're developing, the less likely you feel that you need to get rid of it, but sustaining it becomes very expensive, not just for your time, but for the cost of your client as well. So it's a hard thing to do. I know that I spent some time with a client that I was going to be leaving, that I had expended, probably 5,000 hours over a course of 10 years of maintaining, realizing that I had code in there from old days that, I needed to clean up, and so I went through all the old stuff and got rid of the crap and got rid of the dead weight and recoded things so that they were more logically sound by today's standards, placing globals with variables and sometimes just kind of sometimes going even to a more of a brute force, so that I know that the guy who follows after me will be able to see exactly what my intentions are.
And
the usefulness, go ahead.
documenting heavily.
Documenting heavily,
Yeah.
and for us FileMaker programmers, of course, keeping a clean relationship table. So I'm a pretty strict anchor buoy guy, and so speaking of duplication, I have a lot of duplication of table occurrences, more so that if I didn't use anchor buoy, but it's more readable.
It's where the performance is too.
That's right. That was kind of for FileMaker. That's an unexpected benefit. Anchor buoy is a very fast performer. The fewer hops that you take, the faster your performance will be.
I'd like to jump in here for a second, if
Please do.
you don't mind. So this conversation actually makes me a little nervous. And the reason being is that one of the things that I'm really proud of is something you mentioned, like a toolkit. So I have a set of scripts that are like my toolkit, and they're function-based scripts that allow me to basically build a solution, passing everything in script parameters from, coded in the buttons and stuff, to do everything from setting multiple fields, creating new records, navigation, and they're all tied together so that just by defining the script parameters in the button, I could create a button that when you click it, it will open a new window, go to this layout, create a new record, set these fields, close the window, all dictated by the script parameters in the button. Basically the scripts are like the navigation script, of course, and then there's set field, go to object, things like that, to where I can just completely create a whole series of functions from that button using those scripts. And so it's all very abstract, because this one set of script allows me to very quickly program things and build a solution, and literally can build almost an entire solution without ever having to add additional scripts, because I have this one suite of modular scripts that I can reference with script parameters. So the drawback to that, and one of the things that I understand and I'm hearing a lot of, is the problem is that the next developer that might come along to work in my solution is going to have to learn how to use my scripts first and foremost. Like, they're not going to be able to use those scripts until they understand exactly what's going on, which is not going to be, an easy thing to do.
And if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, where does that leave your
Exactly. Yeah, it leaves us a solution that is not going to be easy for somebody to take over. And so that's one of the things that, I was at Pause on Error and attended that session. And it's one of the things that it got me thinking about, because I absolutely, like I said, I'm very proud of these scripts. I love what I've done with them. And I love it makes my work so much easier, because I can quickly do things. I can do things so much faster this way. and one of the reasons I hate to even bring this up as a topic and throw this out is, I've been doing a little work with Jonathan. And so I'm kind of throwing it out there that, as we collaborate on something and he gets in there, it's going to take some understanding for him to know. So, but we've talked about it as well. And one of the big things, first and foremost, is just I've got to document everything a whole lot better than I do. And so it's something that's on my to-do list, is to go through all these scripts and just, really document the hell out of everything so that the next developer can understand what's going on. But yeah, so, I mean, I think it's definitely falls right in line with this topic because of the, it's like taking that abstraction to an extreme. And yeah, because I thought I did something pretty cool there, and I still, I'm not entirely convinced that I need to abandon that approach entirely. But there are, some considerations that these conversations have brought up, and things that it makes me think about, how to prepare for the next guy and how to make it easier for the next person to come along and be able to code in my solution. And a lot of the stuff we've talked about, like the if thens and everything that comes up, the whole development of these scripts came about from, it really started when FileMaker first introduced single function buttons, where you could just, instead of attaching it to a script, you could just set a field. But how often do I ever need a button to set one field and one field only and do nothing else? And so I decided to create a script and give it the ability to essentially, through script parameters, do an infinite number of fields. Field 1, get field name, field value 1, this value, and then field 2, field 3 in the script parameters. So it could literally set an infinite number of fields in the script parameters. But then the next thing was, well, what if I also wanted to set that field and then go to this object? Well, then I created the go to object script. And then what if I want to open a window first? And so the whole development came about from starting with that simple set field script to, in this case, I want to do this first, or I want to do this after. And so it was constantly adding in these new parameters, if open window first, then open the window. And then I did a modular window script to spawn a new window and stuff like that. So yeah. So, I mean, everything I'm doing is kind of a prime example of everything that we're talking about here. And so it's definitely sparked a lot of thought on my part for how do I want to proceed with that? Do I want to, continue with it? Do I want to just narrow it down and simplify it more? I'm not sure where I'm going to go with it, but.
Let me ask you a question, Ron. It's a FileMaker-y sort of thing. How long ago did you create this toolkit?
It's going on about 6 years ago.
Okay. So your script parameters, are they using name value pairs or using JSON?
It's using a let function.
Using a let function. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the sort of thing that, could lend itself well to JSON as well. But as the architecture of FileMaker may change, that could have some radical impact on what you're doing. Don't know that yet, but
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with well done abstraction. I mean, some examples, I think Seed Code's calendar solution is abstracted well, lets a developer make some modifications in interfaces that they present. But if you actually wanted to change the basic code itself, it's pretty difficult to do. But yeah, congratulations on what you've created there. So, and it sounds to me like you've created it in such a sense that it's sort of FileMaker interface driven, less than workflow driven. So I don't know if you can apply this to every single use case that you have. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly, creating a solution, it always comes down to there's always going to be some additional scripts that just where the functions cannot be covered by the modular scripting. But for the most part, I mean, and again, it just kind of going back to what led to this in the first place. When I first started building in FileMaker, 12 plus years ago, I started with tutorials by John Mark Osborne, and it was, you built a script for every button. The button, if you wanted to go to this layout, you had a script that was specifically designed to go from this layout to that layout. And so in the first, 4 or 5 years of working in this one solution, because I've been an in-house developer for like 12 years working on the same solution. And so I did a massive rebuild about 6 years ago. And one of the reasons I did that is because, I basically taught myself, like so many of us FileMaker developers, we get thrown into it like, yeah, I think I can build a database. I kind of played around with this FileMaker thing before. And I got thrown into, building a database that was, absolutely essential to the business, and taught myself through tutorials and forums and all that kind of stuff. So the end result after 4 or 5 years is that I had just an ungodly number of scripts, because from the ground up, learning the basics of FileMaker was just, you attach a script to the button and tell it to go to this layout. And then in another context, then you have to do a whole nother script. So I ended up with this massive amount of scripts. So I started this, I kind of started on this journey of trying to build a solution with the least amount of scripts possible, which was kind of going to the other extreme. But that's essentially what I've accomplished with this suite of modular scripts, is that, I can essentially build 90% of a CRM solution without ever having to add another script. And some of the modular scripts do require some hard-coded modifications. So you would say, if you're on this layout, then like I have a modular sort script, and basically it looks to see what table it's based on. And if it's based on this table, sort it this way. If it's based on that table, sort it that way. And then you can, of course, create more if else and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's not only kind of dependent on the table name structure, but also I have a menu system that is entirely based on the layout list and the naming convention of the layouts, because it basically takes the layout list, parses out the layout list, and fills in button bars to create the menu structure for the navigation. So to add another layout, all I have to do is name it according to the naming convention, and it falls into the menu structure without ever having to add another button, without ever having to script another button. It just automatically appears in the menu structure, and you can click and go instantly. So
that's one of the things we were talking about needed a heavy documentation.
Yeah.
Because if the next developer says, "Oh, I don't like the way that's named," or that name doesn't make sense, and they switch something, then your whole system that's built on that house of cards comes crashing down.
Right. So it needs to be properly documented that, hey, this naming convention is vital to the operation of the application. So.
Hey, Ron, I just wanted to say that there's really no cost to verbosity in your scripts with comments or even in your calculation dialogues, right?
Yeah.
I use a keyboard, one of those keyboard memory things, type it for me type of thing, right? And I have set up, a preamble for my comments, which is the date and then my name and then a spot to write what the hell it is. Yeah. My scripts are all heavily documented, because if I go back to something 3 weeks after I created it, I'm not going to remember what state of mind I was. Oftentimes I'm asking myself, what was I smoking when I created this?
Yeah.
Well, you are the next guy.
And I do want to say, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm really grateful. Jonathan's been kind of mentoring me a little bit and helping me out with some things. And because I've been like a sole programmer in an in-house environment, the documentation has never been up to par, because nobody else was in the system. Like, I was the only one doing the FileMaker development. So it wasn't something that I ever had to be too terribly concerned about, but I've been getting a lot of tips from Jonathan on how to comment, how to document everything. And so that's definitely on my agenda, to go back through a lot of stuff and just get it properly documented. So.
With me, it's self-defense. I don't care about the next guy, because who knows, the next guy can can figure his own thing out. like you're saying, 3 weeks from now, I want to know, Mr. Scott, you're so right. I want to know what I was thinking at that time when I started to put that together. And, well, partly because it just makes it so much faster to maintain a script when you go in there and there's all this documentation. Oh, okay, here's where it's called from. Here's what's required to make the script work, and here's what the plan was originally for the script. What it's supposed to do. I mean, just having a little bit of perspective on there just makes it so much easier to get in there and work on. And I'm at that age where I had breakfast, or how did those shoes get tied? And so I got to have a lot of documentation. So
I think another thing that's kind of important in all that too is simply consistency. And it's been an experience with this solution I've been working on for 12 years for my employer. I'm actually breaking off and going freelance. I've been working on, my own company for the last year or so, but as I get back to older scripts, the way I did them, it's like, what was I thinking? Like we were talking about, what the hell was I thinking? But the newer stuff that I work on in the last few years and everything, it's like, it's all very consistent. I pretty much write scripts the same way every time, which is very helpful because I can kind of figure out what I was thinking because it was consistent. But definitely back in years past when I was first starting out, the scripts were all over the place the way they were written. So trying to figure out what I was thinking was a little bit more difficult.
Well, you hadn't developed a process yet. You hadn't developed what you thought you needed to do yet, and now you got a pretty good idea of how you like it done, and so that's just experience.
Yeah,
and that's handy.
Yeah.
Well, I want to help or ask a question about kind of connecting the dots. So I'm kind of an intermediate developer. I'm learning from all of you, and as I've and doing only internal solutions. So it's what did I learn on this one, and how am I applying it to the next one, and then going back. And I'm abstracting, but how much effort, or what would be the tip or the trick is like, well, I've learned something, I abstracted, I'm able to now reuse that code in the next solution, and yet I find an improvement. I find a better way to do something, or it turns out this next solution needs an additional feature. How much effort do you put into going back and saying, okay, let's bring everything up to version 1.1, and backwards compatibility versus, I can perceive that you've got good scripts abstracted, you have better scripts abstracting the next solution, and you never go back. And when you go back, it's like, that was 3 weeks ago. And
I think you have to think about, at least for us independent developers, the cost benefit to your client for you to go back and do things like that. You kind of have to take that analysis and say, hey, I can do all that stuff. I'll be real happy with my code for me, but what does it really give the client? And they're paying for it. Now, it may be a little bit different on an in-house solution where you have a little bit more room typically to breathe in developing your code. You're not always against a perceived budget wall. I don't think there's one right answer to that.
Well, that also depends on whether you're charging by the hour or whether you're flat fee.
That's true.
If you're fixed price or value price, you can do whatever you want, and then you do things that are efficient for you. So if I'm going to spend an extra hour to make something better down the road, or the way I like it, then that's my choice to do that. If I'm charging by the hour, I don't want to have those conversations with the client. Oh, why did you spend an extra hour on cleaning up your code? I mean, that doesn't benefit me anything. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't charge by the hour, because I want to do things my way, and I don't want to have those conversations with the client.
In my particular case with this suite of scripts that I've written, that's something that I've paid a lot of attention to as I've continued to kind of grow them, and as I was developing them, I actually was able to, when I made a change, take into account the backwards compatibility for the other solution that it was in and things like that. So, even we're talking about in this scenario, I need it to do this. So now I need to write in that if this scenario, then do this. But in the way that I wrote it in, it doesn't affect the way it's being used through the rest of the solution, because it like giving it a unique parameter that, and only acting on it if that parameter exists, means that in all the other places that I've used it, that parameter doesn't exist. So it's not going to affect them. So things like that. So it's something that, I mean, I definitely have put a lot of kind of thought into as I've continued to expand the functionality of these scripts, making sure not to break them for the previous use case. But yeah, it takes a lot of kind of forethought and hindsight, you know what I mean? And there have been times when I've thought, when I've done something significantly different, and maybe in a couple of solutions, I had to kind of go back and make some changes to make sure that it worked the same in all of them. But for the most part, I've been able to grow those scripts without having to risk or compromise the backwards compatibility. So,
Ron, do you use a ticketing system, Ron?
ticketing system is in.
Like, do you create? You have an internal support ticket system if somebody finds something wrong with the software, or you are going to develop a new feature or address something? Do you have a ticket system?
No, the environment that I've been working in is a lot more casual than that. It's about 20 employees. So when they have something they want to add, or when something gets added in, and they just contact me directly, it's just direct conversations. The growth of the solution itself over the years has more been, it's been about 80%, about 20% the business owner or somebody else in the company saying, hey, wouldn't it be nice if it could do this? And about the other 80% was kind of developed from me kind of deciding or coming up with the idea that, hey, I could have it do this. How does that sound? And so a lot of that was left in my hands to develop out this solution. But of course, I was part of that business, so I knew the business model inside and out. So I knew the need and could actually develop it from within. And more often than not, the best stuff that I put into the solution was because it helped me more than anybody else. But no,
you're the sole developer?
What's that?
You're the sole developer?
The sole developer in this system, yeah. But because it was such a casual environment, it just really kind of, there's been no official roadmap or documentation or ticketing systems or anything like that. It's just, you know, the owner will say, hey, can you throw this in? Can we do this? And I'll say, yep. And then I'll do it for them and it'll be done. So.
Yeah. So our tickets are generally written with a template of acceptance criteria, which we develop with the user stakeholders. And something I learned from Sindelar was to create those tickets and then go to the places in your solution that would be affected by you working on that ticket and put that ticket number in. Makes it real easy to then go back with a tool like Developer Assistant and find all the scripts or fields that would relate to that particular feature ticket. And the other thing that we do is we budget in for refactoring our code every 6 weeks. We do a 2-week sprint we call hardening. And as we're going in and doing our development work, when we find situations that could benefit from refactoring, we'll go ahead and create a ticket on it. And that ticket then is worked on during those scheduled hardening sprints, which, you know, I'm an internal developer, but I think even as a business, if you're a development business, there's a practical reason for that kind of activity. It's so that the software doesn't prematurely become stale. It helps you keep your investment up to date.
I've always said that any FileMaker solution is a living document, and it's going to change over time, and the requirements will change over time. And if you've built great abstractions, excuse me, it'll benefit those changes. If you've written poor abstractions, you pay a heavy cost.
It's alive.
It's alive. So I'll just continue with a few more thoughts here. So questions that you need to ask yourself when you're abstracting, or after you've abstracted, you would say, hey, this abstraction was incredibly valuable, but was it worth all the pain it caused? And if it wasn't, is there a better way to do it? If it was worth it, how do we deal with problems that it has caused? And what sort of paradoxes can evolve out of here? Once again, the more valuable an abstraction is, the more damage it can cause. So if you've got an error in your abstraction, that error propagates around your whole solution. And these things tend to propagate exponentially. Any abstraction increases in value when you're able to use it more frequently. It saves you time and effort because you don't have to write extra code. I think we can all agree on that. And that the usefulness is correlated with how general that abstraction is. The more generic it is, the more applicable it is to a wider variety of situations. So it becomes more valuable. But like I said before, as you multiply your effort, you also are amplifying any mistakes that you've made. And if you introduce bugs into that implementation, they appear everywhere. If you get the interface wrong and wrote the wrong abstractions, the headaches it causes are amplified across your code base. You can't have viable abstractions without the risk that those abstractions will cause damage. So what do you do about it? I would say be extremely careful when you're trying to generalize your code. Think twice before creating a generic component to handle multiple use cases. It will cost you more than you think it will. And we can't have valuable abstractions without the risk that those abstractions will cause damage. So, I mean, the takeaways for me is that, and I've said this earlier, is don't abstract early in the process when working on a new solution. Ron's toolkit sounds great. I think it's a wonderful expenditure effort until it isn't. But that remains to be seen. There are some genius coders out there. That's not me. You know, my thing is that, you know, you're talking, Ron, about how you use a let function rather than JSON. I find let functions to be very hard to debug when you've got a lot of code in there that you're doing. It's kind of hard to parse that stuff out. So you probably already expended a ton of energy in those areas, and hopefully the dust is settled. And that's all I got to say on the subject.
I sense that you're
when
saying,
it comes to, I will say when it comes to passing the parameters in the let function, one of the things that was a tough learning curve was being able to quote everything out, the field references and everything robust, because in the script parameter, of course, it all has to be quoted out, but you still want to be able to get those references live so that if you change a field name and all that kind of stuff, it took a while to get used to being able to write that let function and not, you know, have the slashes in the wrong place and the quotes in the wrong place and everything. And in the script parameter dialog, it is difficult to debug because it doesn't necessarily give you, as you're typing, it won't give you the fields and the functions as you're typing because you've got it quoted out. So, I mean, just some quirkiness about using those let functions, and the more elaborate you get with what you're passing. But at this point, yeah, I mean, I could pretty much do it blindfolded, so it's not an issue anymore. But in the beginning, it was tough learning how to do those let functions and get them all properly escape quoted and all that kind of stuff.
And I think if you're using another area of abstraction, is not just in the scripting, it's also in the type of model that you are building. If you're doing transactional stuff, if you're doing data separation or using what's it called, model something controller,
model view controller, MVC.
Model view control, all that stuff lends itself to abstraction. And that code can become somewhat inscrutable. So you just have to be really careful if you're going to go that way. I mean, and those models themselves are a form of abstraction. They have great benefit, but they can also be very irksome to work with, especially in the hands of the wrong coder, which would probably be me.
Well, I'd like to praise Ron for his efforts at making a stab at creating some useful abstractions. I think you're saying that you don't avoid abstractions. It's
I
just
use
that
abstraction. Yeah.
that you use them carefully and at the right time in the right place, and they can be very powerful. But at the same time, like a lot of things, if you don't use it carefully, you'll bite yourself in the butt.
Yeah, I don't think abstraction is a holy grail. I think that's kind of my thought. I mean, we all use abstraction. I use abstraction, but I think in the wrong hands, it could really be a bad scenario for a solution. And it's more than anything, it's a cautionary tale. You just sort of need to think about it before you do it. Think about the use case that you're applying it for. If you're with a new solution, don't jump on the abstraction bandwagon too early. If you got toolkits and they work, that's fine, Ron. I applaud your efforts. But these things, I run a user group too, and many cases I would love to have sessions where we share code, and I've always shared my code, the good, the bad, the ugly. But it is like pulling teeth for other people to share their code because they're very protective and shy, because it's like looking inside somebody's brain at times. People don't want that. They feel like they're being stripped down naked when they're looking at their code.
And somebody may find something that they don't like, and then your baby is being criticized. Hey, that's an ugly baby. And nobody wants to hear that.
And that can apply to your own code, taking a hard look at your own code where you may have built something, and then as the workflow has changed over the years, you extracted something, but now you got so many conditionals in it that doesn't work. You've got to be able to know when to rebuild or rethink something, because our code is not sacred.
Should never be. Yeah.
But we have that mindset that, if you ever look at somebody's code, somebody's built this genius thing. This client project that I had that I inherited that was 600% over budget. The only solution was just to hack away at the abstracted code and just forget about it and just not use it to get it done. And the development went very fast. Didn't save the client, but it went very fast. The client was already doomed. The project was already doomed. So,
yeah. I've heard developers say that if they have to pick up a project that somebody else worked on, then they double the price.
That's a good thought.
Because you spend so much more time on it, and it's so much more difficult. It requires so much more effort to reorient your thoughts along the way that developer's procedures were. So
when I inherit, if somebody asks me can you maintain a system, first thing I want to do is look at the relationship table and see how spaghetti coded it is. And that's a good indication whether you want to touch it or not. Or this is going to take untangling spaghetti code can be a just total nightmare in so many different ways. Yeah. Even with tools like Inspector, FM Perception, that sort of thing. So easy to break a bad model.
Yeah, because you don't know where those potholes are.
That's right.
The landmines.
Mm-hmm. They're all.
We have some time left. I don't know if anybody be interested, but I'd be happy to kind of demonstrate the scripting that I do.
I've got about 10 more minutes.
Oh,
sorry. Did you were to say something, Mike?
Oh, no, I just said, in response to Ron, it says, I've said pretty much what I needed to say, and just, it's just discussion from here on.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I'd
But-
be interested in kind of seeing the approach. We don't need to dig too deep, but how complicated those script parameters get is curious to me.
Yeah, why don't you pull that out, Ron?
All right.
or pull out your script, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me.
Yeah, do we have video mute?
Yeah, whip it out.
All right. So this is my little CRM. And so I can kind of give you a quick demonstration of just like everything is based on script parameters. So if I wanted to look up an invoice over here, I've got a type ahead search. And this is a modular type ahead script that I send the parameters to. And the parameter looks like this. Tells it what field to do the search in. And so I'm sending it the field names to search in. And then it's also got the ability to add a constrained field so that you can constrain by, I mean, it's just got all of these elaborate options that all are dictated by the script parameters. But this is most of the scripting I use uses a very common, either like you name a field and then you name the value. And then you go on to the next one, and it starts with no number and then starts with 1 after that. So that dictates how this same type ahead search field can be put on any layout. And then with the script parameter, I can tell it what to search when you're typing, and it does a find. I have a print button to print an invoice that, let's see, actually so I can go to the thing, print the invoice. It opens up a new window, gets it ready for print. And then it goes to the print script, and the print script has different options, like whether it's records being browsed or whether or not to do preview. So here's the script parameter for that. So basically it's using the navigation script, and it's telling it to open a new window. Then I can dictate what type of window. So if I change this and then, oops, what did I just do? Yeah. I don't know how I missed. Yeah, so this is where it gets to be, I don't know how that could be.
Is it a reserved word?
No. Oh, there's a field missing. So I made a change down here and changed a field. So I've got to fix that. I'm in the process of redoing my table structure. I actually got, this is something I talked about quite a bit on Pause on Error. I had been using selector connector. Found out selector connector was bad. So I'm restructuring everything to anchor buoy. So that's where I've been making changes to this CRM. So anyway, so that's what happened there. So if I change it to document window, now it opens it in a document window. When it hits the script, it's basically, it's going to the navigation script. And it's coming through. One of the things too, that the beginning of every script, I determine whether it's being called as a subscript or not by parsing out the parameter. I add this little character to the script parameter. If it's so, when the script runs, it can tell whether it's being called as a subscript or not. And so there's certain things that'll run. There's a validation script that runs your basic script openers, then validation script. So I can actually put in the print button, for instance.
But I didn't see anywhere in your documentation in the script commenting that particular was an equal sign or whatever it was a
Right.
notation that it was coming from a subscript.
Right.
It'd
So
be
that's part
hard
of
for
the,
somebody to suss that out.
yeah. So that's exactly where I definitely well aware, as I show you these scripts, that they are far short on documentation. That's why I said that's definitely on my to-do list to go through and do all this documentation, but I can add a validation or even a confirm equals 1, then text equals. And now when I I click this button, it's going to ask me if I'm sure I want. So, I mean, stuff like that, where I can actually just, everything is in the script parameters. So it's going to the navigation script. It's then calling it's going through the validation script. Then it's calling the print script. This particular invoice, after it's done printing, it will actually add a note that I printed an invoice. So part of that same structure in the button is I'm telling it what fields to set for the note fields to create a note. Print field, which specifies a field to print to set after printing. And then it uses a relationship to create a note record. So all specified within the button parameter, it's telling this button to go to this layout, enter preview mode, go to print. After it's printed, if the print was not canceled, then it goes to it sets the fields to create the note, and it all does it based on what's in the script parameter. So, and then there's just all throughout the system, it's all set up that way. So I've got an email. This tells it, the email button will open up the email and it'll tell it what to grab for the to field and all that kind of stuff. It's using the same navigation script. It's just opening it's just got different script parameters.
So you in script parameters, in essence, are writing a script of sorts. The sequence matters in these script parameters. You know, one of the, and again, this is just what the rut I've gotten into, but I have started putting all of this into a variable and then attaching it as a script parameter so that for debug purposes, I can see just before it fires. I find this back and forth, loading the windows, opening and close, and all that. The edit window just drives me nuts sometimes.
Yeah, all this is just being parsed at the beginning of every script. There's it actually does a set variable to evaluate the script parameter. Right there.
Okay.
I might surmise here, Ron, that the more abstracted your script here is, the more your design layer that you're working with has to conform to some very strict standards.
Yeah. Yeah, that would definitely be true.
Yeah.
Anyway, just because give some example, kind of wanted to show too, this menu system is set up based on, and this is a different type of abstraction, but it's so it's based on the naming convention of the layouts. So if I wanted to add a new layout, I would come into, let's say, dashboard, and then duplicate the layout, call it something else, test, and then I can even give it a submenu of test. Oops. So, and then when I come out here, and I go to home, now I have test here, and I can also have submenus here. In this case, I'm not using a submenu, but if I were to change that, let's make it, oops, wrong layout, sorry. I wanted to work with the test one. So say I wanted to make it bring it up one level. Now it's going to show up in the upper menu as test and test sub over here. So I don't ever have to edit my menu buttons.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mike, for your presentation, for sharing that with us, for taking the time. Thank you, Ron, for showing us your scripting there. And open for a good suggestion for presentation for next month. So if anybody has anything or they've seen something recently, let me know. So do anybody have any more questions? All righty. Well, ladies and gentlemen, another month in the can, and we'll see everybody next month. Thank you very much for coming. And next month, it's right around Thanksgiving. I think it's a few days before Thanksgiving, but usually the fourth Tuesday. So thank you so much. Oh, somebody just arrived. Stephen, did you get knocked off? Oh, he's still connecting. I don't want to hang up on him while he's trying to connect.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
See you in Seattle, Mike.
All right.
Yeah. Mike has a group. You're meeting. When's your next meeting?
We meet on the second Tuesday of the month.
Okay. So you're a couple weeks
6
out.
p.m. Pacific time.
Okay. You know what your presentation is going to be this month?
I don't know yet. I'm still mulling it over. I may have one of the pause presenters present. So I'm not going to give my presentation to the group unless they want it. So, but John, I just wanted to ask you, is the presentation, is it what you thought it was going to be?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot. Everywhere I go, there's the other Johns, and so I always have to say, "Oh, you mean me?" This is exactly what I thought it was going to be. That's great. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's a good time. I like the discussion ones more than just the hey, I've got this idea and everybody should do it my way. So that was really good.
Yeah, I try to kind of keep it as abstract as much as possible.
Jonathan,
It's an abstract concept. Yes, Alan.
during this whole thing, when talking about abstractions, I kept thinking about Brian Ginn.
Yeah.
That's an abstraction of an abstraction.
Yeah. Yeah, we won't talk about him on the recording. But no, Brian is a really smart guy. And
Oh,
I will say
absolutely.
this, he's very smart. He has an approach to his structural nomenclature that is, shall we say, unique, and it works for him. It works great for him. It's just
But
that
to try and follow him,
it's not possible for mere mortals to
No.
understand what he's doing. So, but he loves it and he's committed to it, and he does really well with it. It's just that it's not anything that anybody else. We should have him on here to present sometime and give everybody an idea of real abstraction. So anyway, everybody, thank you for coming. And somebody put something in the chat. What do we got? Stephen had to scoot. Blackwell. So anyway, we'll catch everybody next month. Thanks a bunch.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much,
Thanks,
Mike.
Jonathan.
That worked out really well, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye.